goes way back. The ancient Assyrians had a god called Pazuzu, and the bas-reliefs of him look extremely close to the images of Mothman. And by the way, the demon in The Exorcist was supposed to have been Pazuzu, which possessed the young girl Regan. Isn't that odd?
That is really odd.
Yeah, it is. And also, here's another interesting note. Native Americans had a demon around the West Virginia area where Point Pleasant is, and they referred to it as Piasu. Now, isn't that awfully close to the Assyrian Mothman Pazuzu?
Very much so. I mean, some of these reports, I mean, you take them in and you go, okay, well, yeah, I don't know if I buy that one. Joe Taylor. Now, he has a fossil museum in Texas, in Blanco, Texas. Now, he is world-renowned, known as taking, dinosaur bones and restoring them from museums and stuff like that. Now, his friend, lady friend, actually her best friend was out, driving early in the morning on a back road out there. No traffic, no nothing. And she saw what she thought was a guy standing in the road. So she stopped, got out of her car, and, told the guy to move and yelled at him. And then she realized it had the glowing eyes, and all of a sudden, the arms, which turned out to be wings, it just kind of flew away, and it really shook her up. But the bad thing...
I can't imagine actually having witnessed one of those in person in the dark of night by myself somewhere. Can you? I mean, I think I would be scared, you know how, and I think I'd be running like crazy in the opposite direction. I mean, they say the eyes are mesmerizing, that they almost hypnotize you. The thing looks ugly. It looks evil. In fact, everyone always refers to it as looking horrible, and there's always a sense of apprehension and deep anxiety about it. It always seems to be associated with death as well.
It does. But you know what the bad thing is, Rob? Several months goes by because she has to, with whatever work she does, she has to travel that road like at around 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And what he told me, again, his friend contacts him and said she saw another one of those things, a Mothman again. But this time she hit it with her car. And, Tom investigated it. He even called up some experts at it, just to find out more information about Mothman. But here's what she said. She was driving, and all of a sudden, in the middle of the road, here this creature again was standing. She thought she hit it and killed a human being, and she was really shook up. She gets out of her car. The thing is standing like 10, 12 feet away from her in the road, glaring at her. And she said it was ugly. Now, the thing is, she had her driver's bumper and fender was dented from hitting it. But again, this creature looked at her, glared at her, and flew off.
Well, in the Mothman prophecies, the same thing happened. Their car hit the Mothman, and then when it swerved, it hit trash cans, and the protagonist, the woman, thought she'd hit a human being or something, and then he said, no, it's just the trash cans. But when he examined the damage, he realized that it was in an area the trash cans could never have hit. Whatever they hit was in the wrong spot on the front of the car, so for it to have been a trash can. So it has happened more than once, apparently. These things are almost like road runners. They race alongside of cars. They seem to want to be in the middle of the road. They will fly at you from a field nearby. You hear this a lot, that they're standing in a field nearby and they fly at you. By the way, they also seem to be associated with animal mutilations as well.
I didn't know that. I did. What I was going to ask you, have you heard what they eat? Because something this big has to have some type of enormous appetite. And I'm wondering if they are watching humans and are inquisitive about humans and tormenting humans, because that's what it seems like they're doing.
It does seem to be deliberate torment. I mean, they do seem to be malevolent in nature, at least by our standards, yes. And as for what they eat, this is interesting. In one case, there was a cow that was thrown over a power line. Now, whatever this was, and this was the devil monster, I can't think of the exact name they used for it, in New Jersey. And they said that this seemed to be almost impossible, that somebody could lift a cow and throw it over a power line. They said the only way you could have done it is with a crane, and who in the right mind would have gone to such extremes to try to do that, especially with the threat of electrocution with a crane, trying to put an animal that's basically a wet sack of meat on top of a live power line. There's a problem, though. According to the laws of physics, these things should not be able to fly.
No, that's the whole thing. How could they? But they seem to have magical powers. Again, like what this lady told, her friend who told Tom, the thing like levitated off the ground and then started flying. This trucker in Eugene, Oregon said that the creature levitated off the ground and then, opened up its wings and flew off.
We get that a lot. The thing seems to be able to float up vertically. Even in the Point Pleasant sightings, it could float vertically upwards and then shoot off horizontally and flap its wings. But how it's levitating, we don't know. There's a problem. For a human being, even smaller than the size of these things are supposed to be, you'd have to have a 20-foot wingspread in order for them to fly, but a human still couldn't fly. They simply don't have the musculature to be able to lift off the ground. You'd have to have very strong muscles up there to do it. And it does defy the laws of physics. So some people wonder if they don't have some artificial means of levitating.
It has to be. Again, I sent an email off to this trucker. And, again, like he said, quote unquote, it levitated off the ground for a few seconds. And he thought the guy was going to put his arms out, but it turned out to be wings. And then it flew off. But the whole time this was going on, whatever it was just glaring at him. Could you imagine how
you get that
would be?
Glaring thing a lot. People refer to it as mesmerizing or hypnotizing. Also, it causes great shock and trauma. One woman had to seek out professional help, therapeutic help, because of staring into its eyes. So, but apparently it doesn't seem to do it with animals. The dog at Point Pleasant that went after it did not seem to be affected by the eyes. Of course, the dog then disappeared, and a dead dog was seen on the road later by another couple when the thing was flying alongside their car. And they wondered if it wasn't the same dog later on that it had killed it. And there were animal mutilations in the area at that time. And just a few days before, there had been UFO sightings in the same area. Some people wonder if it isn't an alien pet, which seems a bit extreme to me. But, when you don't know what something is, you think of any sort of answer that's possible. And then also there's the character Indrid Cole, who has been seen and heard by quite a few people, and no one can account for what he is either.
Could they actually be aliens, a species of a alien?
Well, they could be a natural cryptid creature of this earth, which seems unlikely to me since they seem to defy the laws of physics. They could be from another planet and have come on UFOs, because there are often UFO sightings in or around the time that these things seem to appear in those areas. Or they could be a trans-dimensional being. And by trans-dimensional, I don't mean they're from another dimension. I mean they are a product of this earth, but our earth may exist in more than 3 dimensions. And they may be in and out sort of that other dimension. That would explain how they could fly in their own dimension, but it doesn't explain how they could fly in ours, where gravity would seem to dictate they could not.
Well, yeah, I would think about that. I remember one of the scientists, was telling me back 2 years ago that, our dimensions, as something was living, on our planet, on your street, in your house, you would never see it if it was in another dimension.
Well, you might actually, because you have heard of the concept of shadow people, right?
Oh, yes.
Right. They could be trans-dimensional beings, too. We're just getting glimpses of them at different times in different ways. In fact, what we think of as ghosts might be actually trans-dimensional beings that would sort of in and out of our reality. They could, and actually, it's hard to explain, but they could be a part of our Earth, a natural part of it, just a part of the reality of our Earth that we're not aware of, any more than someone who's blind doesn't know what light looks like if they're blind from birth, or colors. They just have no concept of it and wouldn't. We might be the same way. We might be blind to this other dimension that exists here right alongside of us.
Well, maybe that also shows that these cryptics, especially like Mothman, I haven't heard of any outright aggression towards humans. Have you? I mean, I've seen where they, have kind of tormented people and things like that, or stared at them, but I certainly haven't heard where they have attacked a human being and tried, munching on them or anything.
Well, are we talking about cryptids in general here, or the Mothman in particular?
Mothman right now, but then we can talk about cryptids, too, yes.
Okay, well, with Mothman, there is the example of the dog, apparently. There's also the example of cattle mutilations. This was in 1966. No one in America had heard of animal mutilations at the time. So when these occurred just 3 days before, no one understood what it was or what it was about. So it wasn't as if, now we all know what animal mutilations are in crop circles, but in 1966, no, it was not common. No one had heard of it. I hadn't heard of it, and I was really into this stuff even back then as a kid. So, and then you have that cow thrown over a power line, and then, of course, you have disappearing people.
Oh, yeah, boy, do we.
Parks and things, where the case of the one kid I mentioned, I think, on your show one time, where he's sent out to the well for water, it's snowing, and he walks out there, you see the tracks clearly, and then they just stop, and there's no other tracks around him. But it was as if he was lifted up off the ground and just disappeared forever. Mothman?
Maybe, or something. Then when you get into it, if you talk about cattle mutilations, then how about the human mutilations? Could that mean then they could be aggressive towards humans then?
Well, in the case of the one in Sao Paulo, Brazil, it looked as if the body had just been dropped there. We assume it's from a UFO, but maybe it was a Mothman, just picking people off at random. They always seem to be seen in lonely spots away from downtown areas usually, although people have claimed that they could see it buzzing the Twin Towers just before they were destroyed. And others, two people claimed they saw it in Fukushima just a few nights before the tsunami, and the plant had a meltdown. And so it does seem to be a harbinger of death. And it goes back a long ways. I mean, the Greeks had a god, Thanatos, and he looked like a human Mothman. You had Era of the Sumerians. You had the one of the Assyrians, and I always try to pronounce that name and I always have a hard time with it, Pazuzu, I guess it's called. And then there's the Kiva Mothman in Chihuahua, Mexico. There's the Thunderbird in the history of Native Americans in the western area and in the eastern area. There is Shinigami in Japanese legend. It was the god or messenger of death. And again, the depictions of him look very like the Mothman. And don't forget, in our own Bible, the Old Testament, we have the angel of death.
Oh, we sure do.
The harbinger of death.
Now, I just got an email, or I should say through Messenger. Could these Mothman and some of these cryptids be coming from the inner Earth? There's talk about there could be life in the, underground. Is that possible? Well,
the Mothman in Point Pleasant was sighted near the old what they called the TNT area. It was an old ammunition dump from World War II that the government used and then abandoned. And there was a lot of places that were underground there, bunkers and things. There's also cases in Georgia and in Mexico where the thing was seen near caves. So I'm not going to rule it out.
Yeah, that's interesting, too, because I think is it in Arizona, I'm thinking, too, there's something, but not like the Mothman, but creatures that, like humanoid with wings that have been sighted, coming out of caves and flying and stuff like that. So I don't know.
Well, there is Thunderbird, and the Thunderbird is supposedly depicted as having leathery wings. Now, is the Thunderbird a version of the Mothman? Are we all looking at the same thing and just describing it differently? The ancient Greeks under Alexander the Great described them as silver flying shields. Well, they didn't have cups and saucers back then, certainly not saucers, so they didn't use the term flying saucer, so instead it was flying shields because they were silver and shield-like in nature. But then we say flying saucer because they are saucer-shaped, and we had saucers. But if you don't have that implement, you don't describe it that way. So are we all describing the Mothman the same way based on our own cultures? And that's why there are some discrepancies. But there are also some amazing similarities. Always the red glowing eyes, always the mesmerizing look. always the ability to seem to levitate from the ground and just hover, then shoot off sideways horizontally. I mean, and always the creature seems to be quite large. In England, in Cornwall, and I went there to check it out, they had something they called the Owl Man, who was described very much the same